There are good people who recognize a problem in the world and they say, oh, someone should do something about that. Pointing out problems is easy. We're all good at that. Then there are others who agree, yep, that's a problem. Then they proceed to do something about it. They may not have all the answers, but they step out with courage, going into places that other people may not want to go, but they do it anyway. Those are the people that we call heroes. I heard of such a person, and when I learned that she is also a passionate motorcycle rider, well, that was someone I really wanted to talk with. Kirsten Midura is a change agent in the environmental and social good spaces. Professionally, Kirsten is a career consultant in sustainability, renewable energy, and marine conservation with experience in nonprofit, corporate, and startup environments. In her spare time, Kirsten runs an organization called Engines for Change. It's a nonprofit that uses motorcycles as tools for environmental and social good. And I'm so excited today to share with you my conversation with a hero, Kirsten Midura. Stay tuned. Recorded in beautiful Loveland, Colorado. Welcome to Peace, Love, Moto, the podcast for motorcyclists seeking that peaceful, easy feeling as we cruise through this life together. Are you ready? Let's go. Well, I'm so happy to have another wonderful guest with us today on the Peace, Love, Moto podcast, Kirsten Midura. I have admired you from afar and not in a stalking way. It was your video. So as my listeners know, I've been involved with the Distinguished Gentleman's Ride, and I've been a host for a couple of years too, but just really fell in love with the whole thing. And one of the many things about the DGR that I loved was the videos that were put together. And Kirsten, I found yours called The Search. We're going to circle back to that, but just want to welcome you to our show and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about these topics. I love DGR. I haven't been as involved lately as I was back when I was living in New York City, which again, we'll get to at some point.
Yeah.
But I love the mission of DGR, this Distinguished Gentleman's Ride for anybody who hasn't heard of it. And I've had just nothing but good experiences with them. So I'm excited to talk to you today about all the work that I'm working on and, all the common threads.
Oh, absolutely. We'll kind of make a big loop out of this conversation. But again, thank you so much for joining me today. I've had a chance to interview people that I would call heroes, and you're certainly one of them. I guess the way I think of it is that, you hear the expression, see something, say something. Got it, right? And then there is the do something. The do something takes courage. And from our little bit of dialogue back and forth through emails, and as I've investigated other stuff that you're working on, I just so appreciate that courage. And I want to find out where that comes from, because not everybody has that. So let's start from the beginning then. So how, with the whole motorcycle thread, I know you do a whole lot more than that. How did you get started with motorcycling?
Yeah, absolutely. So the motorcycle thread kind of came out of all of the other work that I was doing, actually. So my background is in renewable energy and international development work. And in 2015, I think it was, I was living down in Nicaragua, and I was doing development work, installing solar panels on people's homes and, doing gray water gardens, for people who were impacted by what at the time was like a 5-year drought in Nicaragua, and a whole range of other sustainability projects, and leading a grant down there. And when I traveled for work, I was in the trucks with the guys and, had our own public transportation through the cities. But anytime I traveled anywhere else, there's not really reliable transportation in Nicaragua. And so if you wanted to go anywhere kind of remote, your options were either to rent a scooter or a dirt bike. And I didn't know how to ride a dirt bike. And so I was out there on these, 50cc scooters, probably riding on all of these off-road trails that I really had no business being on that kind of a bike. getting flat tires and meeting local mechanics who work out of their home garages and that type of thing. So it was quite the adventure. But when I returned back to the States, I realized that if I wanted to keep doing development work or doing any sort of travel, it was a really good, I call it a James Bond skill, to learn how to ride a dirt bike, learn how to ride a motorcycle. So I ended up taking, the basic rider training course with no intention whatsoever of getting a license, just to get the knowledge and skills. But then I ended up moving to New York City afterward, and that's where I got involved in DGR and a lot of this community building. And I mean, when I first moved to New York, I didn't really have too many friends. I had a handful of them, but I did end up buying a motorcycle. And so, as you know from the search, buying that one motorcycle led me to the motorcycle community, which then just kind of snowballed from there. So out of all that came my own nonprofit, Engines for Change, which I know we'll talk about in a minute. But the idea behind Engines for Change is really leveraging that community and the altruism of the community and kind of trying to point people in the right direction, and also really acknowledging and elevating the purpose that motorcycles play in all of these different aspects of life beyond just fun. So there's obviously the development component to it in international countries. I say international being in the States, so that's
Right.
what that means to me. But, just really their role in accessibility for remote areas, in public health, overcoming some transportation infrastructure barriers, obviously the community and mental health aspects of it, which, obviously DGR helps to address. So these are a lot of topics I'm throwing out there, but all that to say is that really my origin story came from seeing how motorcycles are used in the rest of the world and acknowledging the potential that they have at sort of a global scale.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask maybe a more broader, earlier question.
Sure.
This is something I asked Mark Hawa, the founder of the Distinguished Gentleman's Right. Mark, where did all this come from? Where did the desire to recognize that, hey, this is a big worldwide problem. There are people hurting. Their environment is hurting. Somebody's got to do something, and maybe it's got to be me. The way Mark described it is he had a brother who was, I believe he was disabled, but his parents instilled in him and his brother that you are the one who goes and opens the door for the elderly person or whatever. You do it. So is that, I was wondering, where did it come from for you?
Yeah, I've had a number of chats with Mark about this. I know Mark obviously through DGR, and I think we've had a lot of discussion around men's mental health and the cause behind it. And, Mark gets a lot of attention for DGR and the shiny bikes and the shiny cars and looking cool and, doing it quote unquote for a cause. But when you really get down to the discussions of the cause that he's trying to address, like, I just have so much respect for all of the other work that he does that he doesn't talk about as much and that other people don't talk about as much, to bring together men's group and address mental health in very actionable ways. So I do want to say that I have respect for Mark, and a lot of that is from the stuff that we don't get to see as much. So I just want to put that out there. But also for me, I mean, I do think a lot of it comes from my parents. My parents are both very charitable. My mom has been volunteering with her own personal causes for so long. I mean, since before I was born. My dad's more of a businessman, but he's kind of the financial side of things, where he'll donate to causes and really understands how money helps these causes to progress and allows us to address them. And my mom is more of the boots on the ground action kind of person, where she gets her hands dirty. And, so I think that kind of gives me a balanced perspective of charitable work, right? Being able to say, yes, I can get my hands dirty and do this, but I also realize the value of the money. So if I can donate to a cause, with all the things happening around the world right now, I can't get everywhere. I can't address everything, but a dollar is a dollar in this society where we're at right now. So being able to financially support causes that you can't personally contribute to, I think is really important. And I've also been in positions where I'm not making a whole lot of money. I mean, I've spent most of my career working with nonprofits, which is not the most lucrative career path. But there are often times where I'm like, look, I can't donate to your fundraiser, but I can go out and spend an evening volunteering at a food bank, or, spend my weekend planting trees, like that type of thing. So there are always ways to get involved. And I think that that's one of the things that I really want to show with this is like anybody from any walk of life can get involved in the causes that they care about. You just have to be smart about how to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Is it fair to say too that those who do get involved, you think you're doing it for others, but then it turns around and it just feels great all of a sudden. Like, you know
Honestly,
what? I've done something that's important and I did it and I'm happy with myself.
I mean, in the same way that motorcycles are a common connector for a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, charity work is the same, right? Being able to act on your values that you may express, say, on social media or when you're talking to people, but really being able to show that you care, I think is a great connector and a great way to meet people that you might not otherwise. I think that I know a lot of people. I have a lot of friends who suffer from depression and anxiety and a lot of mental health issues, which is part of why I think mental health is such an important, critical conversation for us to be having. Um, but one of my top recommendations for them is to go out and volunteer, partially because it gets you out of your own head, right? It gets you out of your own house. It gives you something to do. It also allows you to really get a better understanding and build empathy for people who are going through things that maybe aren't worse but are different, and gives you a little bit more perspective. But yeah, you also go home at the end of the day and you feel good about it because you've done something that's beyond just yourself and being in your own mind. And that's not to say that volunteering is the answer to very clinical things like depression, but I think it is one tool in our toolkit to be able to kind of advance our own personal lives.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I heard an expression, I think it was on an Instagram video, and it just really stuck with me. I told somebody this the other day and they said, "Oh, wow, that's really cool." And it was something to the effect of a great society is when old men plant trees, the shade of which they will never sit. Wow. And I still, even though I've heard that for a while and I've even told other people about it, I still kind of get cold chills like, yeah, that's good. When we can think beyond ourselves and we can think not just only to our family, but to a stranger, their family. And yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in my day job outside of motorcycling, I work very heavily in the environmental field, in climate
Yeah.
tech, and in venture philanthropy is sort of the term for it. And it is interesting. I work with a lot of founders, especially in the clean tech and climate tech industries, who are doing it because it's the cool new thing. But there are also a whole number of founders and people who are working on cool projects with the intention of that sort of like intergenerational wealth that's not financial in nature, right? So there's the indigenous concept that everything that you do is meant to serve people like your descendants 7 generations down the line, and really having that understanding where the work I'm doing today, I mean, it is very frustrating working in the climate industry. I have climate anxiety like crazy, as everybody who works in environmentalism does. But the idea that I'm chipping away at this massive, massive global problem with the intention of making future generations' lives better, especially 7 generations down the line, it's like the only, silver lining of hope in what otherwise can be a very daunting industry. So, and it's the same thing with motorcycles. I think a lot of people think about going out on their day-to-day rides or, making this sort of like small group effort and connecting with other people. But if they can kind of use what they have and use their passions to do something greater, then it's just going to make life better for people down the line.
Yeah, yeah. You'd mentioned the environmental projects that you've been involved with. Do you mind describing that? And then I want to get to Engines for Change also. Well,
Well,
that's,
lucky for us, they're one and the same.
oh, okay. Yeah.
So I founded Engines for Change in 2019, and I actually started it with a beach cleanup. So it was very straightforward, very simple. We gathered people together at a coffee shop one morning. We rode together out to a beach. We partnered with a local nonprofit out in New York City called NYCH2O, which specializes in, urban cleanups, like wetlands and beaches and that type of thing. So they brought a lot of their, nonprofit acumen to the exercise. But then we cleaned up the beach, and then afterward, all went to, a spot nearby and had a little after party. And really, it was all about engagement and community building and having fun together. But at the end of the day, it was something where I coming from a science background, I'm like, well, this is how many tons of trash we gathered, and here's, how many bags, and then I went to the recycling facility and dropped it off and got to see the recycling facility. So there's definitely more that you can do with it, but it can really be as simple as just going out and cleaning up a beach and going on a fun ride with your friends. Like, it doesn't need to be a huge undertaking. You don't need to start your own nonprofit to have an impact. That has sort of evolved. And right now, some of the projects I'm working on, one in particular, we are designing a solar arrays for the Peruvian National Park Service. So in 2022, I think it was, I went down to Peru with an organization called Rally for Rangers, which is an amazing organization if you haven't heard of it.
I have. I've tracked out a couple of videos on that too.
Oh,
Really
yeah, it's so good.
cool.
They just came out with their feature documentary. So they basically work with park rangers around the world in places like they started in Mongolia, but they've done Nepal and Patagonia and Bhutan and all of these different national parklands all across the globe. And what they do is they bring people on these rides. So you fundraise to go on this ride, you buy a motorcycle new, and then you ride it out to these remote areas that the park rangers are at, and you donate the motorcycles to them. And the purpose for that is to, one, so that you can break in the motorcycles so they don't have to, take it easy just from the start. But also because a lot of these park rangers are so, they're neck deep in their conservation work, and they don't have time to go to the nearest, quote unquote, nearest major city, which is thousands of miles away, to pick up these bikes and ride them back. So you do get a really cool trip out of it, but it also serves a purpose. And, obviously the park rangers then have these motorcycles. They just went back to Mongolia this year recently for the first time in 10 years. And some of those bikes are still running and still being used by the park rangers. So I went down to Peru with Rally for Rangers, rode across the country, and met the Peruvian National Park Service. And because I have a background and some connections in the solar world, they mentioned that one of their biggest needs was solar. So now I am using my connections in the solar world to help design systems for the Peruvian National Park Service ranger stations. And then we're going to go down there once we get the funding to do this. So if anybody has a cause they want to donate to, feel free to talk to me. But once we're able to go down there, we'll install the solar panels on these ranger stations, and then hopefully be able to go out on some of their patrols and really see what this work looks like. And those patrols are carried out via motorcycle, because that's the only way you can access it. So, access these parklands. So those aren't the only programs that we're working on, but with in terms of the environment, all around the world, people are using motorcycles for conservation efforts and for public health purposes. And motorcycles are just such a valuable tool that I think institutionally and globally are being completely overlooked. So that's a big part of what I'm trying to do, is really raise awareness around how these tools are being used to help people, to serve all these purposes that our systems and our institutions are failing us at.
I'm this is very important to me. I want to be sure, and I will list all of the ways that the listeners can donate and the different areas that you're working in. But just in general, can you describe how the donation process works?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a handful of, there are two sort of focus areas that we do. One is community development and community building programs that we carry out when we have people who are willing to do it. So a lot of people reach out and say, how do I get involved? And I say, well, where are you based, right? So if you're based in Portland, I run volunteer days where we go out to, we went out to a farm out here called Black Futures Farm, which is all about food sovereignty, especially for Black and Brown communities, and reconnecting with nature, but also having control, regaining control over the food systems and where your food comes from. And big agriculture is a whole other topic area we can go down, but is not necessarily relevant right now. But really reconnecting with the food that we eat and where it comes from. And so we did a little ride out there. We helped, volunteer on the farm, learned about the program and what they do. and then got together and talked about it, right? And learned from our experiences. So, and, we've done things in the past, like we did a big voter awareness campaign in 2020 called Ride to the Polls with partners all around the US. We did a collective food drive where different organizers in different cities across, I think, 13 cities in the US organized food drives in partnership with local nonprofits like food banks and that type of thing for that one. I was in Brooklyn and we partnered with, oh my God, University is their name. And so they do urban agriculture and aquaculture, kind of with the same premise of Black Futures Farm. But because it's urban, a lot of food donations come in, and then we basically took them out to community fridges in Brooklyn. So people donated food, we picked them up, we packed them on the bikes, we went out to the community fridges, and we left them for people. And if people aren't familiar with community fridges, basically there are these free fridges throughout certain urban areas and cities where anybody can just go up and leave food for other people or take food from it. So the idea is food security, no questions asked. So there are all these different ways that you can, leverage your motorcycle for this stuff. So that's sort of some of the local volunteer days that we help to facilitate. But really what you need for those are people who are willing to get their hands dirty and do the work, right? So if you're in a city where we don't have local organizers, the question really is well, can you and your friends go out and do something, and we can help you to do that in your communities. But it's not really the kind of thing where I'm going to come out from Portland and be like, this is what you should do to serve your community. Like, a big part of these programs are understanding what your community needs. And if you don't know that, learn about it, right? That's a big part of it, is just the learning process. In terms of international work, we partner with different groups overseas who are doing exactly that, right? Understanding what their community needs and trying to figure out a way that they can use their community, their network, and their motorcycles to be able to help that. So whether it's the Peruvian National Park Service and going down and helping them with solar implementation, we also have a partner, Kiki, who's based out of LA, who's running this humanitarian ride called Rebels with a Cause. And so at the end of May, we have a group of people going out to Pakistan to ride through there and meet local community members. And then a portion of those proceeds go toward a couple schools out there and providing water filters for the schools, providing school supplies and wheelchairs and all of that. Right now, we're trying to fundraise for one school to get a generator because they don't really have reliable electricity. So it's really understanding what are people lacking, and then building those connections and finding ways to raise awareness and use motorcycles as an awareness raising tool and also a development tool.
Yeah.
So back to your original question, which is how can people get involved? You can organize something in your community, which I'm happy to help walk you through. Or you can donate to one of these causes. We also have a program in Kenya where the organizer uses motorcycles to deliver medicine and clothing and food to children living on the streets and families living in slums. And so it's sort of, a public health dispensary opportunity, right? And so they can always use donations. And that's not to say that you necessarily can go to Kenya and do some of this work, but you can, aid with your dollars. So we are undergoing a website reconstruction, which we've kind of been doing for a little while, honestly. But once we go through that, then we'll have it very clearly laid out. These are the programs that we're working on. These are the ways that we're supporting, and this is how you can support each individual program. So there's a lot of moving parts that we're working right now on formalizing and cleaning up.
Again, as I just sit here and listen to the way you described all this with such a passion and a smile too, definitely with the concern that, again, I use the expression, we live in a very hurting world. There's so many of us I got my little coffee over here too, and I'm in a warm house, and I'm fine. I'm going to have a bed to sleep in tonight. That's not reality for most of the world. And, I just love how you've taken the initiative to think that, I'm very fortunate, and I've got a good mind, and I'm going to do something for somebody else because it's important and it makes me feel good too. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I come very much from a place of privilege, right? I come from a comfortable background. I have a loving family. I have never wanted for anything. I've never gone hungry. And I have a decent nest egg. Like if anything happened to me, I could go stay with my parents and everything is great, you know? And that is something that I think, especially in the US, where we are obsessed with like, oh, I struggled and I made it up from the bottom. And like some people genuinely did, and you should absolutely be proud of that. But I do think that I think that taking the stigma out of like the concept of privilege and saying like, and acknowledging that you're privileged, right? Acknowledging that that you're in a warm house, that you have enough money, that you're not, you know, struggling every single day. If that is the reality that you're living in, I think it's so important to recognize that and to do what you can to help people who are in those positions, you know? Um, and the fact of the matter is that I can think of very few people who don't have something that they can offer the rest of the world and don't have a way that they can contribute. And I think that a lot of times the people who I see who are the most engaged and the most active and like helping people the most are the ones who really don't have a lot themselves. I mean, we can get into capitalism, we can get into the conversations about the people at the top. But I don't know. I just feel like the more you have, the more effort you should be putting into helping other people. And sadly, I don't think that that's the reality that the world is operating in right now. So I don't know. I'm going to step down off my pedestal, but like people should be doing more and can be doing more. And I think in the motorcycling industry, people do want to do more. Like the reason I've been parts of so many different communities and so many different groups of like industries and whatnot throughout my life and career. And motorcycles have always stuck out to me because people are always like, I want to go on a ride and I want to do something good. And how can I make the two happen hand in hand? And the answer is like, yes, you absolutely can do that. So one great example, this woman, Maya, down in the Bay Area, she has started organizing what she calls the Be Nice Rally. So it's a rally where everybody comes together. You know, I went last year. I had the privilege of going last year. This year, their bunny run is in April, so people can still go. People can still sign up. But basically, you sign up, you pay the ticket price, and a portion of those proceeds go to an organization out in Kenya called the Tiba Foundation, where they use motorcycles as a form of women's empowerment, and they train up women in Kenya to be motorcycle taxi drivers, which is like local economic empowerment, women's empowerment. And it's an amazing program, right? And this is Maya going, I want to do something. I mean, I talked to her about this a few years ago. She's like, I want to do something. How do I do it? And so this year is the first year that we're their fiscal sponsor. So because we're a 501c3 nonprofit, we can accept tax deductible donations. And a lot of people like Kiki and Maya can't because they don't have the 501c3 status. But that's part of why I started this organization, was to be able to facilitate other people organizing their own initiatives. And so, this is, I think, the second full year. So she has 2 a year that she's been doing the Be Nice Rally, and everyone is invited. And a portion of your proceeds automatically go to this really important initiative out in Kenya, and you get to have a fun time doing it. So I love the idea that you can leverage your passions and, you know, the things that you like doing on your weekends and do it for a cause. And my goal with Engines for Change is to be a facilitator of that.
Oh, that's so cool. Can I steal that idea?
Sure. Oh my God, join us. Like that's the nice thing about Engines for Change, and the way I do it is like, I am naturally a connector. I love connecting people with other people who can help them advance their own causes. And so the way I want to set this up is that it's a collaboration. I would love to be some sort of like central network for all of these people all around the world doing this important work and going, you can connect through us. Like that is my goal. My goal is not to make this exclusive. My goal is to help make this a global movement, really.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's so many things I want to talk with you more about offline.
Right? This is also my brain, like at all times, it's just running 1,000,000 miles an hour in every direction. So thank you, ADHD, for that, I guess.
Yeah, me too. And I drink a lot of coffee between all of that. So here's the deal, and I'll just kind of share. Before we started recording, I may have mentioned I started this Peace Love Moto podcast Well, I didn't find another podcast like it. And the whole thing about motorcycling for me, to give away my age, I started riding when I was 11 and I'm 61. It's 50 years of riding. And I still remember, and I share this on some episodes of the podcast. When I go out today on my big old motorcycle and I go out, I become my 11-year-old self again. It's the same thing. I think I mentioned this in maybe an episode or two ago, but it's just two wheels and a motor underneath me, and it's the road ahead. And it's the same thing I experienced as a little kid. So that does so much for me. And so, anyway, back to the podcast, I was just kind of thinking, oh, I'd like to listen to stuff like that. I don't have to listen to something really, really long or, talking about going to get the next beer or whatever. Instead, what is it? What is the joy about all of this, and where does it connect with other writers that are become my friends? And an episode idea that I've been thinking about for the future, for example, and I've been trying to think, what would I call it? And I'm thinking of calling it something like a wave of community, because we have the motorcycle wave, right? And in the same way, I'm a Jeep driver too. I drive
Yeah.
an old 27-year-old Jeep too. Same thing. It's an old Jeep Wrangler, and they have the Jeep Wave. So same deal.
I hear that Subaru drivers do the same thing, except with the Outback or the Forester or something like that.
Oh.
That was I was like, wait, what? So yeah, there's apparently
it's just like, I have no idea who I'm waving at, but it doesn't matter. It's just like we have this one thing in common. And again, when it comes back to motorcycling, we're taking a risk every time we go out. We're in the weather, could be great, could be awful. We're out in the weather together. And, that's just a common bond right there that you could take anybody to the coffee shop and have some conversation about. So all of that together. And I made a note here. I'll show you the Be Nice rally. I've been thinking with the podcast, should I turn it into a ride or a movement of some sort, where the whole thing is that the peace comes from peace of mind, pretty much. Yeah. The love comes from, you got to love yourself first. Then when you learn to love yourself, you'll learn to love other people well. Peace, love. And then the motto is just a thread. It could be bicycling for that matter. It doesn't matter. Gardening, peace, love, gardening. Could be the same thing. But, the motto is just the thread. But you've really got me thinking, though, about a ride, of turning it into a real community as the podcast kind of grows and gets picked up here and there, which has been exciting. I'm just trying to figure out what is next. But you've been such an inspiration, just your energy and everything. I want to talk more about that, but I appreciate your time so much. I want to circle back though, if you don't mind, if you have another few minutes, to the search. I thought that was just so well done, from the music, the video work, and the message underneath that, just the heart-wrenching message. And then you ended up with a high point, of a joy. So would you mind describing where that idea came from and how it all came together so well?
Yeah, so that actually was part of a series that Cam Elkins, Stories of Bike, put together, of a range of different riders who were engaged in DGR. And he also has other series as well about riders that aren't connected with DGR. But that was part of sort of a broader, I think, campaign, may or may not be the word for it. But I had been talking with Cam before that, I think. I can't remember exactly how we first connected, but he's Australian. And so he and his colleague came out to New York City, and we spent a couple days together just riding around the city. I think it was a little bit different from some of the other episodes. I think a lot of the other episodes had people talking and doing interviews, to camera. But I don't know, we just rode around the city being little hooligans. I mean, the riding itself was not hooligan-esque, but he was definitely like leaning out of a van, and we're like trying to avoid cops and stuff. Maybe we shouldn't publish that, but it happened.
Well, maybe we could edit that out if you want.
Yeah, no, it's fine, I think. But I have so much respect for Cam and his team and his vision, and he is an incredible cinematographer. First of all, as you can tell, like everything he touches is just beautiful gold. But is also just the sweetest guy and genuinely cares about his subjects. Like, I mean, the stuff that he I kind of was given the opportunity through that to pay tribute to my cousin, who the first round of the of the video kind of made it sound like he committed suicide. He did not commit suicide, but he did struggle with alcoholism and mental health, and it hit me really hard when he did pass away. And it was, for me, a good way to pay tribute to him, and to acknowledge some of the issues that, we haven't dug in too much to this topic yet, but there are some serious ways in which the US is lacking in mental health treatment, like dire situation. And I think almost everybody will agree with me on that. So being able to acknowledge that and bring that out in conversation and have real discussions around it and just talk about it is so important. And I think it resonated with a lot of people. It resonated with the video itself, resonated with a lot of people in terms of loneliness, right? Being in a big city, being surrounded by people. And this was pre-pandemic. So, I mean, especially after the pandemic, when people are like, I just moved to LA and everything shut down. I just moved to New York and everything shut down, and just feeling isolated in massive urban centers with like millions of people it's more universal than I think a lot of us care to admit. And being able to have those conversations and have somebody listen and have somebody talk about it and be able to resonate with that experience is so important. And I do think that is really the beauty of DGR, is bringing a lot of these issues to the forefront of our minds and saying, hey, this is happening. This is happening to you too. You're not alone. Maybe we don't have a solution, but at least we can all acknowledge the problem.
Yeah.
So that was really, that was a really nice experience for me. Everything I've done with DGR, from leading, I've led, helped co-organize some of the events with the lead organizers, who are also amazing human beings. Being able to do that. I was featured in the DGR book. If there was like I think 10-year anniversary book. So I had a page dedicated to that. So everybody should buy it because it's great. And then you get to read more about me, which I know you're not sick of yet. But
no, I have it. That is one heavy book.
Oh, it's a coffee table.
Yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah.
But so worth it. I've got it downstairs, and I've been through it. And it's so well done. So well done. The photography, the stories, it's wonderful.
Yeah. And I think that in the States, okay. I'm like, where do I start with this conversation topic? So I have kind of made a point of learning about different nonprofits, different organizations across the world who are using motorcycles for purposes beyond just motorcycling. And in the States, what I've found is that most of the nonprofits that I have found are addressing mental health in some capacity. So you have things like Ride My Road is dedicated to survivors of human trafficking. I think all of whom are women, which, is a really important discussion topic that I think not enough people have. You have Motorcycle Missions down in, I think, Austin, Texas, somewhere in Texas, who do charity builds as a point of bringing together survivors of domestic violence and veterans who, suffer from PTSD. And our system has completely failed veterans and has completely failed people with mental health and PTSD and a lot of different issues. And you get like DGR and just the global conversation topics. And I think as a society, we do a really, really bad job of addressing mental health, talking about it, providing services to help with it. And what I've seen in the US is that so many of these nonprofits are dedicated to creating space for these conversations to happen. And that to me just sheds a whole lot of light. I don't think that we talk about the use of motorcycles in that context, and that is part of what I want to do. But I think that once we start to acknowledge that, it really sheds a light on the insufficiencies in our systems, in our institutions. So I think DGR has done a really great job of raising awareness around men's mental health, which is such an important topic and something that is pervasive and definitely an issue. I do think we could do a better job of talking about women's mental health as a society as well. Especially with regard to domestic violence, especially with regard to human trafficking. Like, they're taboo topics to talk about. And I think we need to change that, because we can't address something and change something that we're not even willing to acknowledge.
So over the past couple of months, in my day job, I have been working from downtown Denver. Now, I am right now in Loveland, Colorado, the sweetheart city, the Valentine capital, all that. And it is as wonderful and vanilla as it sounds. In that we have a little bit of a homeless population, but not very much at all. Everything else is just pretty much wonderful Candyland with hearts and all that good stuff, which is great. It's wonderful. But the past couple of months, I've been going to downtown Denver. So I've been taking the bus, and I walk from the bus to our location about 7 blocks. And on that walk, I have been exposed to more homeless people than I've ever seen in my life. And I wanted to share one thing. This happened just last week. I was about to exit our building and start my walk down to Union Station to catch my bus back to Loveland, again from downtown Denver. And as I looked out the window from the elevator, there was a young lady out there. She had to be 20, I guess, with a backpack, clearly probably everything she owned. And she was just talking to the world, talking to the sky and everything. My heart just broke. And I felt like I just needed to see this a little closer. And whether it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, I don't know. But I intentionally went that way to walk past her so I could just get a better look. And it was just heartbreaking. This young lady who, if she hadn't been yelling and screaming and talking to the sky, would have looked like any college student you'd ever want to meet, studying biology or whatever. But how is it? She's just one of hundreds of the homeless that I've seen out there, mostly mentally ill, clearly mentally ill, that I walked right past. And so it's just a new eye opener for me. I've been, I was like you, I was not brought up in a wealthy family at all, but very privileged though, very loving family, very well protected, always had food, always had a place to stay, and that's the way I grew up. But it's just opened my eyes. Again, I keep using the expression, it's such a hurting world out there. And folks like you, who are out there setting an example for all of us, I just can't appreciate that enough. Takes courage. Scary.
I appreciate that. I mean, I'm based in Portland, Oregon, so currently, and I think a lot of issues that are happening across the U.S. and the world, but especially the U.S., are very visible here. Especially, I mean, people talk about homelessness and houselessness as starting during the pandemic, but I saw it starting at the Occupy movement. And, when Occupy Portland happened, Occupy Wall Street, that's when I really started to see things becoming more visible. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this isn't a new thing. Like, it's not like homelessness is getting worse in the US. It's always been here. We just haven't talked about it. We've swept it under a rug. And there are all these pieces of legislation. I mean, I don't know how political we want to get, but there's all this stuff to criminalize or decriminalize and figure out like how drugs play into this and so on and so forth. But what we're not providing is the social services to be able to actually address the issues. We're just, slapping hands and giving fines or putting people in prison, which is a whole other conversation topic that I don't think we want to get into in this. Like, this is such a pervasive, like, all of this stuff is so intertwined. It's so pervasive. I mean, you start talking about mental health, you start talking about drug addiction, not even getting into pharmaceuticals' role in drug addiction, not even talking about intersectionalism and transsectionalism, talking about gender identity and the fact that the transgender community are so much more at risk of being out on the streets for so many more compounding issues that we don't even begin to talk about, or the disabled community, and disabled people like having the issue of being put out on the streets for so many different reasons that you and I might not even be aware of. So, and the thing about motorcycling, to tie it back, right, is that there are people from all walks of life who are involved in motorcycling. To me, that is a beautiful part of this community, is that like pretty much anybody can do it if they really want to. And you meet people who just come from so many different backgrounds and experiences. And what you see in the ads and in commercial, marketing and that type of thing is like the white dude on a motorcycle. And there's a whole history behind public perception of motorcycles in the US related to veterans, related to Hollister riots and Time magazine. And, there's a history there as well. But nobody talks about, we're having a hard enough time pushing for visibility of white women motorcycling. That's not even talking about other races. That's not talking about the non-binary and gender communities. That's not talking about disabled riders. There's so many different types of riders and so many different cross sections of people who are on bikes that we can't even start to talk about because we still can't acknowledge that women are riding motorcycles. It's so backwards and it frustrates me. And I'm like, if I can use my skills and my background and my platform to start some of these conversations, then maybe we have a hope of moving things forward if other people do the same thing. And so I'm really glad that you are open to having these types of conversations on your platform as well, because until we can start doing that at a broader level, nothing's going to change. And we're just going to keep seeing people who are suffering from all of these different problems because we can't even acknowledge that they exist. So,
Yeah.
oh my God, I'm sorry. I got on a huge soapbox. This is the kind of stuff that occupies my brain all the time, So
I use,
and that's just in our own country. That's not even addressing the Middle East right now, or So
I have to work really hard at not feeling sorry for myself sometimes when I don't feel like going into work or whatever, or getting up too early to get to the office, or flying somewhere or whatever for work. I'm real good at feeling sorry for myself. And then I think about, again, that young lady that was out there just yelling and screaming to the sky. Where is she going to be tonight? And what is she going to get to eat? Where is she going to go to the restroom? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't even know where I'm going with that. But
the fact that restrooms are a political topic is just insane to me. That's probably not a good word to use, but the fact that restrooms are a political topic is just it makes me sad. It makes me so sad. And there's not a lot that the average person can do about it, right? Unless we're in a position of power, unless we have a business that we are opening up to people who don't buy something from us. And then why is the onus on small business owners, right? Instead of, I don't know. There are a lot of rabbit holes that we can go down. And the way that I keep my sanity and the way that I stay somewhat upbeat about it is just doing controlling what I can control. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big lesson that I want people to take from this. Is that I can't solve the environmental problem. I'm trying, I'm working in it literally in my day job, but I can't solve it. What I can do is run a beach cleanup and collect X amount of trash and realize what impact that small effort actually has. So you pick up a straw or a piece of microplastic, like a bottle cap or whatever, or smaller, or a cigarette butt, right, from the beach. That is one seabird or one fish or one hermit crab or, something that you might be saving their life. Maybe not forever, but you have to acknowledge the little bits of progress that you can make, because it's going to take that. We can't take down the oil industry right now. We're trying, but that's really what it's going to take to curb emissions, to clean up this planet. Is that realistic for the average person? Absolutely not. But you can go clean. You can bring a bag on a hike with you and pick up the plastic as you go on that hike. You can ride your motorcycle. You can go dirt biking and pick up plastic while you're dirt biking. You can go on a ride with your friends and learn about the native species in the area. I'm obviously from Portland, so I spend a lot of time in nature, but learn about what's invasive versus what is native to your area and either forage or pull those invasive plants. There's so many like little tiny things that you can do that you may not see the impact, right? It may be that 7-generation impact that you're making, but just knowing that you're making some progress is really the only way to like keep your head up with all of the stuff that's going on right now.
Yeah. One of the things that, we talk about in the podcast is the random acts of kindness, and it certainly makes a difference to people. I even kind of go out on a limb a little bit, and I say, if you're in line for coffee and there's someone behind you who clearly has plenty of money, buy their coffee anyway. And they'll say, I've had that happen before. Someone will say, what are you doing? And I'm saying, just want to do something nice. And next thing you know, their heart's changed a little bit. Yeah. And I've also, I keep thinking of all these expressions or little stories. And there's the silly little story. Well, it's not silly. It's a good story of a little boy walking down the beach, I think is how it goes. And there's a storm the day before. And the storm washed up all these starfish. And there's starfish out there drying up and dying on the seashore. So he's walking along. He picks up a starfish and he just launches it out into the water. Picks up another one, and there's thousands of them out there. Well, this man comes walking along and says, "What are you doing? You're really not going to make any difference." And he picks up one of the starfish and says, "Well, it makes a difference to him." And he tosses it on out there. And I'm just reminded of, just like little stories like that too. We are doing it for ourselves because it's our children and our grandchildren and on down that are going to benefit. Back to that original story from the tree that we plant, that will be dead and gone before there's a shade, but someone will have a shade. And that's important.
And I obviously focus a lot on the natural, nature and the environment, because that's where I work and spend a lot of my time. But you're right. I mean, looking at that in terms of an interpersonal connection and softening someone's heart because you're willing to be vulnerable and to be open and to be kind. You have no idea what kind of impact that can have on the next person and the next person and the next person. So, it really is the butterfly effect. And if we kind of start to reframe how we interact with people, on a regular basis, especially people who we don't like, or people who we have issues with, or people who we think are different from us, right? Those are the types. I mean, that is honestly what I love most about motorcycling is like, you can pull up with somebody who on their bike, who has like bumper stickers that you're like, oh, I vehemently disagree with that, right? We have very different political views or goals in life or whatever. But as soon as you see somebody else on two wheels, you're like, oh, we're best friends. It doesn't, all of a sudden it doesn't matter as much anymore because we have that connection. And I wish that we could, or I guess I should say, I hope that we can take that feeling of mutual respect, right? From the fact that we're both out there against the elements, against the traffic, against the arbitrary laws against filtering and lane splitting and stuff and all that type of thing, right? We're all kind of like fighting the same things on the road when we're on two wheels. And if we can adapt that mindset to our personal lives and our professional lives and go, oh, we're all dealing with the same stuff too. We're all dealing with trying to survive, and get home safely at the end of a day, then like, just, I don't know, imagine how much better the world would be if we were all motorcyclists. Like, I know that sounds cheesy, but like, I honestly feel like that's true. And just way more exciting. And we'd have so much less congestion and emissions and, like the world would be better if we were all on two wheels, personally, I think.
You really opened my eyes to so many things I haven't thought about in the 50 years of riding that I hadn't thought about. But you're absolutely right. There's something special about something with a motor and two wheels. I wanted to ask you one more thing, though. I thought this is a good point to actually close here. But what do you think about the future of electric motorcycles going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that occupies a lot of my brain. I think that, at this point, the people who are on electric motorcycles, I think, are early adopters, which is great. It's great to have an early adopter. I think that the tech is still obviously being developed. I think people who are paying attention will see that Cake declared bankruptcy and has now been acquired by their former, so they've been acquired now by or bought or something by their former CEO. So they're going through a transition phase. Obviously, there are other brands who have like attempted and not made it or been acquired by other bigger companies. One that I have my eye on is Rivid, based out of the sort of LA broader area. And I love that company. They're founded by three Vietnamese guys who are children of immigrants who have like really, really like interesting backstories, and they're very sustainability driven, and really doing it for that 7 generations into the future type of thing. So I think that the companies that are pushing for that right now are very intrepid, and I have a lot of respect for them. I don't think that any EVs, including cars, have reached that, they're not a silver bullet, because obviously you have all of the materials that you have to source, virgin materials that you have to source from all these different areas that have their own environmental impact. I personally am of the belief that from a technology standpoint, until we start incorporating circularity into our practices, and by circularity, I mean we find use for the materials that are already out in circulation, that are already being used, right? So like battery recycling, like how do we use those batteries that are already out there, and when they reach the end of their useful lives, how do we take what we already have, the materials we already have in circulation, and turn that into something instead of going out and mining for new resources from the earth? So that's what I kind of work toward in my day job, is like, how do we create this closed loop system of materials? And I think that EVs are a cool way of looking at it because of the potential that you have for how they're charged and not using fossil fuels and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, unless you're getting that from solar power, then you're still using fossil fuels to charge your batteries. So that's just the reality right now. I do hope that down the line, it'll be more accessible for everybody to be able to use sustainable materials. But I think that right now it's kind of a big buzzword. It's, for me, I think it's the new like tech bubble or housing market bubble, like is the climate bubble. Personally, that's my belief. So I don't know. I think it's too early to see what impact EVs will have in the long run, because I think we're just at the start of this industry. And in terms of EV motorcycles, I think it's great. I think it's a good direction to go in. I personally see more potential applications in developing countries. So there's some organizations. There's one out in Rwanda that I've been kind of chatting with a little bit, who I think is the first. I just found out about them, so I'm probably going to butcher this, but I think it's their first EV motorcycle OEM based out of Africa in Rwanda. And so, we're kind of figuring out like, well, what does infrastructure look like out there? The cool thing about EVs is that they can kind of follow in the way of like phone charging, where in other countries around the world, you have these central sort of phone charging areas for people who don't have reliable access to electricity in their homes. EVs could kind of be the same thing, right? Where you have these charging stations, and they mean more for people who don't have charging stations in their home than they do, say, in the United States or Europe, where people probably have outlets and reliable access to electricity. So I think that the impacts for the developing world are different than for the developed world. But I think it's just really early days.
Yeah.
And I think that if we really want to see any sort of progress being made in terms of two wheels, that needs to come along with policy and infrastructure developments as well, where we need to start seeing motorcycle lanes, right? I think the introduction of electric bicycles is interesting because public planners and legislators haven't thought through like, well, what is the infrastructure for an electric bicycle? Like, where do they ride in the bike lane? Do they ride in the street? Do they ride on the sidewalk, right? They're kind of that in between. And so I think that's going to be interesting because it's going to force people to design around electric bicycles, which will then hopefully force them to design around electric motorcycles and motorcycles at large. But I don't think that technology for the sake of technology is enough to help us progress. I think it needs to come with policy changes. I think it needs to come with legislation and infrastructure and all of that. So I know that that was not the straightforward answer that you were hoping for, but
you know what, as my own children, Brad and Stephanie are my kids. They're both adults and both have children of their own now. So I have two grandsons, one from each, one from my son, one from my daughter. And the reason I bring them up is that I see them and I see their friends and people of their age, of the 20s and 30s, who are wonderful people with such hearts and who are not tempting to do what I did when I got out of college, climb the corporate ladder. That's all I thought about. Instead, they've got this bigger heart and this more global view, just like you. This bigger view of, you know what? There's this path, which looks pretty good, could fade, or there's this important path over here that this sounds morbid, but they're going to talk about at my memorial service. You know, this sounds, my mother will hate it if she hears me say this, but I think about that sometimes. There's going to be a day where I'm gone and maybe some people will stand around and talk about what Ron did. And what I hope they say is not that he worked in corporate America, because it's been a good living and I'm grateful for it. My friends at work. What I hope they'll say though, is he was a tour guide at Rocky Mountain National Park, which I do part-time. So this is Rocky right here, actually. Had a podcast that invited people who are making a big difference and just try to make a positive change. That's my hope. And, as opposed to all the other stuff I've tried to toil at just to try to make a living, it seems like, but this is important. This is clearly important to the world. And, so back to you. I can't thank you enough for the courage that you demonstrate clearly, and a very, very intelligent person who is applying that intelligence to making the world a better place. And you are doing that. And thank you for doing that.
My pleasure. And I really appreciate you helping spread the word. And I appreciate that you're building your own legacy as well. And that, it's a different place than it was when my parents were getting into the workforce. And I do think that what is going to outlive us is not I hope that what is going to outlive us is not what makes us money, but where we put our passion into. Because I don't make a whole lot of money in my day job, but I have a lot of passion. So, I'm a legacy person, and I love connecting with other people who are building their own as well. So I appreciate that you're doing that, and that, our paths have crossed. So yeah,
I most definitely would love to go for a motorcycle ride with you.
Absolutely. I'll let you know if I make it to your area, and you let me know if you.
Well, we're just east of Rocky Mountain National Park, and here in northern Colorado.
I'm on a tour now.
Yeah. So I work part-time for Green Jeep Tours on Saturdays, oftentimes in the summertime. And we take tourists in the national park, and I just love it. I've talked about the national park stuff a little bit here and there on the podcast, but I just love it. Just to take people, especially from people from big cities, either New York or Miami or LA or whatever, and let them see this space that is, where they train their ears, like, oh wow, first they say it's so quiet, and they'll say keep listening, and then they hear the wind down through the canyon, or they hear an elk up in the mountain somewhere. And
my favorite part of hikes is stopping and listening.
Yes.
Yeah. So so everybody make sure you vote, because national parks are a socialist measure and run by the National Park Service. So please make sure that you are protecting them with your vote.
My friend Lisa, the park ranger, will be listening. So
great. Well, thank you and her for your service.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Kirsten. Just so appreciate talking with me and taking the time, and again, for what you do and the kind of person you are. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I so enjoyed getting to know Kirsten, learning about what she's been involved with these past years, and I also learned how very kind she is. I know you recognize that too. She genuinely cares about our Mother Nature and about humanity around the world. So I hope you'll join me and our Peace Love Moto community in making a donation to one of those causes that she represents, such as Engines for Change. There is good work being done there, and I'm happy to contribute on behalf of this podcast, and I hope you will too. As always, thank you so much for listening. I wish you peace. I wish you love.